أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أم حسبتم أن تدخلوا الجنة ولما يعلم الله الذين جاهدوا منكم ويعلم الصابرين. صدق الله العلي العظيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين، سيما بقية الله في الأرضين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. Brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. As always, before we begin, if I could see a show of hands, if you can hear me, inshallah. Excellent. And if I could have your undivided attention, we're going to be doing something very special indeed today. One of my favorite stories from the Holy Quran, if not my very favorite story in the Holy Quran, is the story of Prophet Musa. This is a story which has helped me throughout my life, and I believe that it has helped many of you. And after this session, it's going to help us all that little bit more, inshallah. Now, when you approach these stories in the Holy Quran, what you'll notice is other than the story of Yusuf, which is all right there in Surah Yusuf, the other stories are somewhat scattered. You'll have a part of the story in Surah Baqarah, then you'll have another part of the story in Surah Qasas, and they're all over the place. There's lots of wisdoms behind why the Quran is in this way. Um, Maybe Allah wants to give us the story in bite-sized chunks. But what I've done is I've collected all of those various verses and I've put them all in chronological order. And so, what we're going to be doing, inshallah, is going into the story of Prophet Musa, alayhi salam, going through that story step by step and extrapolating and gaining points from that story and the verses concerning it. And you're going to find, inshallah, just how many points there are in this story. As with previous sessions, if you could have your pens and papers ready or whatever devices you're using to take notes, inshallah, so that at the end of the session, we can actually share those extrapolations and those points which you, with your masterful minds that Allah has gifted you with, can share with the group. Now, of course, we're not going to be able to cover the entire story, but let's see how far into the story we get today. Maybe we can complete the story over today, tomorrow, perhaps a third day as well. Without further ado, I'd like you to bless this discussion and this session with a loud and boisterous salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Okay, so the first thing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does is He sets the scene for us. And as I've said numerous times before, and I'll say it numerous times again, inshallah, don't just read the Quran. Let's actually visualize it. Try to think about what is being said behind the lines. And so when He's setting the scene, it begins with the Pharaoh oppressing the people. You see, here, the theme of oppression and tyranny is almost the bedrock of this entire story. And Allah tells us, recall or remember when we saved your forefathers from the people of Pharaoh who inflicted you with the worst torment, slaughtering your newborn sons and keeping your females alive. And in that was a great trial from your Lord. So let's recite the Arabic now so that that meaning can go down into our hearts. وَإِذْ نَجَّيْنَاكُمْ مِنْ آلِ فِرْعَوْنَ يسومونكم سوء العذاب يذبحون أبناءكم ويستحيون نساءكم وفي ذلكم بلاء من ربكم عظيم. So, subhanallah, I want you to imagine this great tyrannical power, the Pharaoh, who is in many ways the epitome of tyranny. Whenever we want to point out a tyrant in the modern world, what do we say? He is a Pharaoh. And this likeness is an appropriate likeness in many cases. Here in this verse, we see that Allah is saying that He subjected Bani Israel to the worst kinds of torment. What did he do? He killed their newborn sons and he kept their females alive. Now, what does this mean? Often when Allah speaks to us, because Allah is so, astaghfirullah, but the Quran is so eloquent, it won't directly tell you certain things and it wants you to infer those meanings. Now, if I were to ask you, a tyrannical king, an overlord like the Pharaoh, why would he kill the men before they can even grow into men and keep the females alive? And when you really break it down and think about that, it's a tragedy. It's awful. It's unthinkable, right? And so those females were used by the men of the Pharaoh's camp. And they begot other children who would be seen as the children of Egypt rather than their own children, the children of Bani Israel themselves. I mean, this is an awful, awful thing to think about. This is the kind of torment that they were subjected to. And I was actually talking about this verse a couple of days ago with, I can't remember who, but I was talking about the concept of the psychological impact of hijab on a society. When your women are in hijab, it gives you a sense of dignity. If you think about lions, for example, a lion having a pride, literally it's called a pride, a family of lions is called a pride. The women will be protected. When you remove that hijab from them, they are no longer protected. And this delivers almost a killing blow to the ego and to the chivalry, the sense of manhood of the men, right? And this is essentially what the Pharaoh did. And this was a great trial. Min rabbikum azim. Huge trial for them. Okay, so just imagine the kinds of oppression that that society was facing. The next verse is where Allah inspired to the mother of Moses, suckle him, but when you fear for him, cast him into the river and do not fear and do not grieve. Indeed, we will return him to you and we will make him one of the messengers. Subhanallah. Why is this so subhanallah? Because the concept of Allah communicating with his servants has been discussed previously in these sessions. And if you guys remember, Allah says that it is not for Allah to speak to any man, any human being, except through three means. One is through sending a messenger, one is from behind a hijab, behind a curtain, and one of them is through wahi itself. In this verse, Allah uses that word wahi, right, for the mother of Moses. Think about the status of the mother of Moses. By the way, while we are reading these verses, you should also be able to see the parallels between the prophets like Musa alayhi salam, their status, their traits, how Allah protected them, and the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, because there's lots of discussions and debates which occur in the Muslim world about the status of the Imams, about the mothers of the Imams, about how they were raised, etc., etc. A lot of these questions would actually be answered if we just went back to the Quran. So anyway, let's recite this Arabic. وأوحينا إلى أم موسى أن أرضعيه فإذا خفت عليه فألقيه في اليم وَلَا تَخَافِي وَلَا تَحْزَنِي. Do not fear and do not grieve. إِنَّا رَأَدُّوهُ إِلَيْكَ وَجَاعِلُوهُ مِنَ الْمُرْسَلِينَ. Allah has not only told the mother of Musa that don't worry, put him into the Moses basket, throw him into the river, let go of him. We will make that child return to you. Not only has he told her that, but he's also informed her that this child of hers is going to be one of the messengers. So if you really break down this verse and think about it, it proves to you that the mother of Musa, or the mothers of the prophets and imams, they had a great status. They came from a family, they came from a lineage which had informed them beforehand of these prophecies, and they knew somehow that they have a great destiny ahead of them. So the next part tells us that when Musa was thrown into the river, in the basket, and then he was picked up by who? The wife of the Pharaoh. And she said, he will be a comfort of the eye for me and you. Do not kill him. She's talking to Pharaoh. Don't kill him. Perhaps he will benefit us, or we may adopt him as a son. And they perceived not. وقالت امرأة فرعون قرة عين لي ولك لا تقتلوه عسى أن ينفعنا أو نتخذه ولدا وهم لا يشعرون. Who was the wife of the Pharaoh? Dear brothers and sisters, bear this in mind. Her status is so high, she's known as one of the ladies of light. And there's only four or five of them, according to some hadith, in the entire history of the human race, right? Sayyidah Asiya, the wife of the Pharaoh, she's one of those great ladies of light. And this is a sign for us that, look, one of the things that I tell youths is to get married. Go get married, go get married. And a lot of the things that I hear are really interesting because sometimes, for example, they'll say things like, I'm scared. Why are you scared? Maybe that spouse might be an awful person. Here you see that the wife of the Pharaoh is an example for us. She was married to not just a bad person, not just an evil person, not just an abusive person, but the Pharaoh. Okay. It can't get any worse than that in one sense. And yet, Allah exalted her to such an extent that, she became one of the ladies of light, unparalleled by 99.9% of the people alive in the world today, unparalleled by all the women who have ever lived other than those four ladies of light, unparalleled in the history of the human race. And this is not part of the story just yet, but because after this, there's not really a mention of her, I just want to throw this in there. She, despite being married to the tyrant of her time, the Taghut of her time, she stood up against him. And in this particular verse, you can see that she used her position as the wife of the Pharaoh to save this child who would grow up to be the messenger of God. Subhanallah. What was her fate? What was her destiny? She became Shahida. How was she Shaheed? How did she accomplish martyrdom? The Pharaoh actually ordered, in one hadith I've seen, that horses should be tied to ropes, and the ends of those ropes should be tied to each of her arms and legs. Okay, so her arms were all tied with ropes or chains to these horses, four horses, her arms and her legs. And these horses were commanded to gallop in opposite directions. And so she was literally torn limb from limb. Okay, this is the Shahida. And these people understand this. They are role models for us. And so even from this verse, if you dive into it, you take a deep dive into the tafsir, not even that deep, by the way, if you just go and look at what the ahadith are saying about her destiny, herein you can see that if you still have fears about standing up against the tyrants and oppressors, these are our role models, dear brothers, sorry, and dear sisters. And it tells us, وَهُمْ لَا يَشْعُرُونَ. They did not perceive, they didn't understand what the destiny would be. So what happens next is the mother of Musa sends her other daughter. And she sent her and she says, go and follow him and see what happens. And we had prevented from him all wet nurses before, right? So Musa did not drink milk from any of the wet nurses, nor did she drink milk from the wife of the Pharaoh, despite her piety, despite her status. So this sister of the mother of the sister of sorry Musa, who's she's followed him throughout the river. One of my all-time favorite animation movies is The Prince of Egypt. Can I see a show of hands if you guys have actually seen The Prince of Egypt? Okay, so The Prince of Egypt is it's made by DreamWorks Studios. It's absolutely fantastic. The musical score is by Hans Zimmer. I mean, it's really a masterpiece. But obviously it's made by the Jews and they will corrupt certain parts of it. So you have to be cautious of that, of course. But at the same time, some of those scenes are just so beautiful that they properly help you to visualize. And so you see this beautiful scene where the sister is rushing through the river and she eventually gets to the palace and she sees that the boy Musa has been picked up by the wife of the Pharaoh. And she says, shall I direct you to a household that will be responsible for him, for you, while they are to him for his upbringing sincere? So she actually directs the wife of the Pharaoh back to the mother of Musa, and she suckles the child. She gives the child her own milk. Why is this so significant? Because there is a point which, there are certain things that I can't even tell you guys because, I've said enough controversial things online. And if I keep saying too many controversial things, people are going to start thinking that I'm saying them just for the purpose of being controversial. That's really not the case. I can't tell you certain things, but what I really need you to understand is that there are secrets in this book which I can't tell you, even Imam Khamenei can't tell you, even some of the great scholars can't tell you. You need to find those secrets for yourself. If you notice, Imam Khamenei, a lot of the times, he gives very general outlines for things, but then when it comes to the Quran, he just tells you to read it. If you go to his letter for the youths of the Western world, he says, go and read this book. That's one of the first things that he says. You need to pick this book up and you need to read it and really try to digest what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, because yeah, there's just simply things I can't tell you. But it would be extraordinary and it would make me smile so much if during the Q&A session somebody extrapolates it and throws this secret at me and say, is this what you're trying to say, Sheikh? And I'll be like, yeah, you got it. That would be amazing. But then it says right after that, so we restored him to his mother, that she might be content and not grieve, and that she would know that the promise of Allah is true. But most of the people do not know. A prophet, an imam, can only suckle from the most pure of people. But bearing in mind what we've just said about the tafsir about Asiya, her status, the wife of the Pharaoh, if her status was so high that, you know, only, she's one of the four ladies of light, the same thing is not said necessarily about the mother of Musa. So perhaps what these verses are saying is that a prophet or an imam can only suckle from their true mother. Perhaps that's one of the insinuations behind this, right? But the idea here is we've seen the whole part, the first section of the story coming all the way around, coming to a close. And the real focus behind it is the mother of Musa. You know, she is the one who's living in that oppressive, tyrannical system. She is the one who is inspired by God to put her child into the river, and she has this grief and pain in her heart. And then Allah promises her, "Don't worry, we're going to return you to your child." And now we see that that promise of Allah is fulfilled, and the heart of the mother of Musa is put at rest. Okay, so now we go to the next part of the story, and this is where Allah fast forwards, and he goes to when Musa has attained maturity. He's now grown up. Where is he grown up? In the palace of the Pharaoh. He's grown up among the elites. And he is essentially seen not as this child of Bani Israel, this guy who's come from the descendants of, Yusuf and Yaqub and Ibrahim. No, 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 no. He is seen by the common masses as somebody who is the Prince of Egypt. Okay. Now, what does the Quran tell us happens? And remember, Allah is telling us those key moments in the life of Musa. If you want to go into more detail about any of the prophets or imams, you'll have to go to the hadith books, like Hayat al-Qulub, which I've recommended before, and I'll recommend again. It is a fantastic book to kind of do a deep dive into the lives of the prophets. But the Quran in particular is highlighting those moments which are most important for you to know, those moments which will best guide you. And it says, now we've come to Surah Qasas and we're on verse 14, if you would like to follow along, because it's a little bit of a longer verse. And he, Musa, that's Surah Qasas, verse 14 to 16. And he went into the city at a time of unvigilance on the part of its people. So he found therein two men fighting. One of these men was in his party. He was one of his Shia, and the other was of his foes, of his enemies. And he who was of his party cried out to him for help against him who was of his enemies. So Musa struck him with his fist and killed him. And he said, "This is on account of the shaitan's doing. Surely he is an enemy openly leading astray." ودخل المدينة على حين غفلة من أهلها فوجد فيها رجلين تقتتلان هذا من شيعته وهذا من عدوه فاستغاثه الذي من شيعته على الذي من عدوه ف... ف... فوكزه موسى. So Musa hit him. He punched him. فقضى عليه قال هذا من عمل الشيطان. This is from the actions of shaitan. إنه عدو مضل مبين. Whoa, God, you have just fast forwarded a whole lot of stuff, and now Allah is catching us up. So the first thing you have to understand is people think that Musa was just this, God forbid, palace pampered brat. He had nothing to do with the society or anybody. He wasn't trying to do anything against the Taghut, right? No, he wasn't. He was just a normal person. And this is the way that the movie Prince of Egypt and, for example, Ten Commandments does portray it, until this fateful moment takes place and he has to run away from Egypt. That's when his whole, realization and awakening happens. However, the Quran is telling us something different. It's telling us that there were two men fighting. One of those men were from his Shia, from his followers, from his party, and one of them was from his enemies. Meaning, whenever this word Shia is used in the Quran, and in other contexts too, it's talking about a political party. And so what you see is that Musa was an active member of the society. He was trying to bring about reforms to the point where he had already made enemies within that civilization. Some people have this misconception that, oh, I have to wait until I become a Maulana and I've studied for 30, 40, 50, 100 years and I become Ayatollah al-Uzma before I do anything. Because until that point, I don't know anything at all. Right? Some people have this misconception in their minds that the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam didn't do anything until he was 40 years old. So I too will not do anything until I'm 40 years old. These are all complete fallacies and misconceptions. Even the Holy Prophet, in his youth, he had formed an entire movement, a youth orientated movement, which was focused. It was called Hilful Fulul, and the focus of it was to do away with injustice in the society. And so, similarly, what you see here is Allah has fast forwarded a whole chunk of Musa's life from when he is a baby to now when he is a young man. He's matured. And throughout that time, he hasn't told you what happened, but you are to understand it through the words of this particular verse where the story is picked up from, right? And this is why I keep on saying, dear brothers and sisters, you have to look at each word of the Quran. Every phrase of the Quran has a lot of wisdom behind it. And unless we are stopping and thinking about it, we won't arrive at these conclusions. All right. And just reading these such verses, do you see now how ludicrous it is? Absolutely insane, mental, when people say that Islam is separate from politics. It's just, do you know how much I have had to hear this from people in the community? It's like, oh my God, what are you talking about? Okay. Now it gets even more interesting because this verse, it's telling us that these two were fighting. One was from Musa's party, one was from his enemy. Okay, what happens? The one who is one of his Shia, the Shia of Musa, he goes, help me, he's oppressing me. Look what he's doing to me. Musa is forced to hit him and he kills him. Number one, who does he hit and who does he kill? Right? He kills him, and the reason I emphasized in the Arabic for wakazahu Musa, Musa hit him, فقضى عليه. It doesn't say that he intentionally killed him, and so what you'll see is that a lot of the times they'll put in brackets he accidentally killed him. Musa was tough. All right. He was among the people. He could hold his own. Not only could he defend himself, but he could defend other people. And we've elaborated on this from in a previous session as well. Remember, we said that your leader should be somebody who is knowledgeable and somebody who's physically fit, or they have that physique. They're able to defend themselves and others. Okay. Musa alayhi salam punches him and he dies. Now, let's assume that the one he punched was not his own Shia, right? Let's assume that he punched one of his enemies. Musa immediately says, this is the shaitan's doing. هذا من عمل الشيطان. This is from the actions of shaitan. Some people, they extrapolate from this, in my opinion, falsely, that when Musa punched the guy, this punch of his was satanic. I shouldn't have punched him. But if you look at other verses of the Quran and just, common sense, if you're seeing somebody being oppressed, somebody's calling out for help, it's your duty to get involved. And when you get involved and you're really strong, accidents might happen, the guy died. Okay, it's really bad. Why is it bad though? Why is this amalu shaitan? It's not. Standing up for the oppressed in no way is bad. In fact, we have a hadith from the Holy Prophet where he said that one who hears a Muslim crying out for help and doesn't help him, that person is not a Muslim. He's cursed. He's outside the folds of the religion, and all sorts of hadith in this kind of with this kind of sentiment. You've heard them all before, I'm sure. The point is, this هذا من عمل الشيطان. This is from the actions of shaitan, is not referring to the punch of Musa, but rather it is referring to the action of this Shia, this so-called Shia of Musa. Okay, why? Why does this make sense? Why would this extrapolation make more sense? Because look, Allah has just fast forwarded a whole lot of what Musa has done during his youth and this build up. And you can see that there are these political parties now poking up, one from the Shia of Musa and one from his enemies. There was this whole movement that was being built by Musa. Maybe it was underground. Maybe they were waiting for the opportune moment to stage an uprising against Fir'aun. Maybe. There's a lot of maybes, but if you really pay attention to it, this would make sense. And so what this Shia was doing is getting into unnecessary conflict with the enemies in public, mind you, in public. And so Musa is forced to step in and intervene. And what effect does this have? It means that the whole movement goes to waste. The whole story, um, this whole, the kindling of this revolution that Musa is actually building, um, it goes to waste. Why? Because the very next verse, it tells us something else. Let's go to the next verse, which tells us, and a man, it's not the next verse, but it's a couple of verses after, it's verse 20 of Surah Qasas. A man comes running to Musa from the furthest part of the city. He comes running and he says, "Oh Musa, indeed the eminent ones, the elites, are conferring over you, intending to kill you. So leave the city. Indeed, I am to you of the sincere advisors." وجاء رجل من أقصى المدينة يسعى قال يا موسى إن الملأ يأتمرون بك ليقتلوك فاخرج إني لك من الناصحين. So you see, because of that action, where Musa was forced to intervene and that guy accidentally got killed, now the entire movement has to take an entirely different direction. And this guy comes running to him and he says, "They are now plotting to kill you, O Musa. You need to get out of Egypt as soon as possible. They are going to either take you to court, throw you in prison, secretly kill you. They're going, they're coming after you now." All right. So through these two verses, what you can really see is that there was this movement that was taking place, and it will help us in understanding what we need to be doing as Muslims, especially if we're living under the tyrannical powers, which, hey, most of us are, if not all of us, right? We need to be carefully plotting, getting people together, pushing politically for our own rights, and etc., to whatever extent we are able to. And there should be a catalytic moment where we say, okay, now's the time where we stage an uprising, for example, whatever the plan might be. But if stupid people among us do the wrong things and start creating mischief and fighting with the enemies openly, in a way that causes social unrest, what that will have is a negative repercussion on the leader of that movement. And so we need to be a little bit careful in that regard as well. Okay, so what we see next is Musa is forced to run from the city. Okay. Musa flees from the city, and okay, so the movies, I like the way that the movies portray it because they show that he just runs. He doesn't have anything. He's in the desert. If you can imagine back in those days, not having access to any food or any water, he comes to a watering hole or a well, a public well, and this is in Madian, a different place, different locality. And so, in order to look at this, we go now to Surah Qasas, verse 23 to 24. And when he came to the well of Madian, he found there a crowd of people watering their flocks, and he found aside from them two women driving back their flocks. He said, "What is your circumstance?" They said, "Do we do not water until the shepherds dispatch their flocks and our father is an old man. A lot to be extrapolated from this verse. But you know what? I want to save this for next time, inshallah, if that's okay with you guys, because I think that's a good place to end it, where Musa actually flees from Egypt, and we can actually keep that, visual memory in our minds for tomorrow's session, inshallah, so we can actually continue from there. Okay, so we're going to go now to the Q&A session. Slash, I am so excited to hear your guys' thoughts, your extrapolations, the points you might have gained from it, inshallah, and for you to share that with the group also. And we'll wait for you guys to put your hands up with a loud and boisterous salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.